For what, over 80 years now, the disappearance of Amelia Earhart has been one of history's greatest mysteries. But what if the answer isn't some huge conspiracy? What if it's really just a story about a series of small, totally avoidable mistakes and one critical, overlooked opportunity? Let's dive in and see how it all went so wrong.
These are some of the last words anyone ever heard from Amelia Earhart, crackling over the radio as her plane flew somewhere over the empty Pacific. The crew on the Coast Guard ship Itasca could hear her clearly, and you can just feel the desperation building in her voice. She knew she was close, so close, but she was completely and utterly lost.
You have to imagine it, the roar of the engines, the static on the radio, the panic setting in. And in the middle of all that chaos, there was one simple thing she could have done. A single flip of a switch that almost certainly would have saved her and her navigator, Fred Noonan. So what was it? Well, to get that, we have to rewind and understand just how they got into this mess in the first place.
Okay, so let's set the stage, because the task she set for herself was just monumental. This wasn't just another flight. This was the single most dangerous leg of an already historic journey. So Earhart was trying to be the first woman to fly around the globe, and she chose the hardest route possible, right along the equator. And this stretch, this was the final boss. Over 4,000 kilometers of nothing but open ocean, pushing her plane to its absolute limit. And her destination? It was a place you've probably never even heard of. And this is what really puts the challenge into perspective. She wasn't aiming for a continent or even a country. She was aiming for an island so small it was basically a dot in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. Finding this tiny strip of land after flying for almost a full day, it's like trying to find one specific needle in a haystack the size of a planet. Now, to hit a target this small, Earhart and her navigator, Fred Noonan, had a really sophisticated, multi-layered plan. The problem was, that plan started to unravel almost from the moment they took off. Okay, so their strategy was basically a 3-layer safety net. First up, you've got dead reckoning. That's just pointing the plane in the right direction and flying at a certain speed for a certain time. Then there's celestial navigation, using the sun and stars to figure out where you are. And finally, the most important tool for the endgame, radio direction finding. So let's talk about this null thing. It's actually pretty clever. Earhart's plane had this special loop antenna. By turning it, she could find the exact spot where a radio signal went completely silent. That null point is way more precise than trying to find where the signal is loudest. This was supposed to be her high-tech lifeline to guide her right to the island. But things started to go wrong almost immediately. Stronger than expected headwinds totally messed up their bed reckoning. Celestial navigation is amazing, but even tiny errors can add up to being miles off course over that distance. And worst of all, it looks like her main receiving antenna broke pretty early on, so she could talk, but she couldn't really hear anyone back. She was basically flying deaf. And then came the first huge red flag. About halfway through the flight, a ship called the Ontario was supposed to act as a radio checkpoint. Earhart sent a last-minute telegram asking them to send out a signal, but that telegram never got there. So she's listening for a signal that was never sent, and they flew right past each other in complete silence. So with the first 2 layers of the plan pretty much shot, everything, I mean everything, was now riding on that high-tech radio link, with the ship waiting at Howland Island, the Itasca. And this is where a series of small, technical misunderstandings just spiraled into a total catastrophe. As she got closer, Earhart asked the Itasca to get a fix on her using her voice transmissions. The problem was she was using a really high-frequency signal. At that distance, radio waves like that bounce all over the atmosphere. It makes getting a clean direction impossible. To the Itasca, it sounded like her signal was coming from everywhere at once. It was a request they just couldn't fulfill. And as if things weren't bad enough, get this, nobody was on the same clock. Earhart, the ship, and the island itself were all on 3 completely different time zones. So when she'd say, "I'll listen on the half hour," it meant something totally different to the guys on the Itasca. This confusion meant they were often transmitting at the exact same time, literally talking over each other. Okay, but this is the truly unbelievable mistake. Before the flight, a radio expert told her to have the Itasca transmit on a frequency of 750 times meters. That's a low frequency, perfect for her direction-finding gear. But somewhere along the way, that got mixed up, and she asked them to transmit on 7,500 kilohertz, a high frequency that was completely useless to her.
a simple, fatal mix-up of units. And here's where it really becomes a tragedy. The commander of the Itasca, his whole crew, they knew. They knew her plane's radio couldn't use that high frequency for direction finding. But whether it was protocol or just not wanting to step on toes, nobody corrected her. Nobody said, Amelia, that won't work. They just followed her flawed instructions.
You can just feel the sheer frustration in this message. She can hear them on that useless high frequency, and she's desperately trying to use her direction finder, but she can't get that null, that minimum signal. It's everywhere and nowhere at once. She's flying blind, begging for a kind of help that, technically, she just can't receive.
So you're probably thinking, well, why didn't she just transmit on a lower frequency herself? Good question. Turns out she'd made another critical decision back on the ground. She'd removed the long trailing antenna needed for low-frequency transmissions, thinking it was just dead weight. That one decision meant she had no way to send a signal that the Itasca could have actually used to find her. So let's just recap. Navigation's off, equipment's broken, communication is a total mess, and the fuel is getting dangerously low. She's deaf, she's blind, and she's lost. It sounds hopeless, right? But there was still one last chance, one simple thing that everyone, including her, just overlooked.
Just think about it for a second. She can transmit that she can't hear their voices. She can hear Morse code, but on the wrong frequency. What's the one piece of gear she has that we haven't talked about as a way to listen?
And there it is. That's the switch, the one that could have changed history. Her radio direction-finding loop antenna. It wasn't just for finding a signal. It was also a super powerful, highly effective receiver. All she had to do was use it to listen.
If she had just flipped one switch to run the incoming audio through that loop antenna, it would have cut through all the static. She would have heard the Itasca's frantic voice messages, heard their questions, heard their attempts to guide her in. Two-way communication would have been restored, and they almost certainly could have talked her right down to a safe landing.
But she never flipped that switch. This was her last message. Those numbers are a line of position from a sun site her navigator had taken. It means she knew she'd missed the island. She was flying a desperate search pattern, north and south along that line, just hoping to spot it before the fuel ran out. The radio operator on the Itasca said her voice sounded like she was on the verge of tears. So, what do we take away from all this? When you boil it all down, the whole tragedy really comes from two separate failures. On one hand, you have Earhart, a brilliant pilot, who just didn't have a deep technical understanding of her own incredibly complex radio gear. And on the other, you have the Itasca's commander, who did have that knowledge, but failed to take the responsibility to step in and prevent a fatal mistake. And that really is the lesson that sticks with you from Amelia Earhart's last flight. It wasn't one big, dramatic failure. It was a chain reaction, a cascade of small errors, tiny miscommunications, and overlooked details that all added up to disaster. It really makes you wonder, doesn't it? How many other disasters, big and small, follow that exact same quiet, deadly pattern?